if God is going to invade the earth, colonize the earth, establish his kingdom, all of that can only take place through God's people. So the issue of God's people is critical. So a prophetic story is told here, how God encountered Jacob in the wilderness. God led him. God instructed him. God kept him as the apple of his eye. These are investments that God makes in the life of a young believer. If you have not labored with God, interacted with God, interfaced with God enough to be able to recognize his voice so that you can be led of him, you are at a loss. Because when God adopts a man, when God adopts a woman, what it does to them is that he begins to lead them. The first blessing he makes available to them is guidance. Guidance. You will never be able to fulfill destiny until you submit to guidance. As intelligent as you are, there are several functions that you are not capable of. Functions for which you will need to defer to God. One of such is guidance, because the Bible says that it is not up to man to direct his steps. So if God begins to bless a man, one of the evidences of the blessings of God on his life is that it brings him into the economy of guidance. Guidance. When you have begun to enjoy guidance from God, then you will now need instruction. How many of you here know how to drive? Know how to drive? Do you know the purpose of the steering wheel? What's the purpose of the steering wheel? You are just doing like this. Yeah? To control. No. You already know where you are going before you set out to come into your car. Is that not so? Huh? Do you just enter the car and just start driving? You have a destination in place. So what I'm saying is that you can never know your destination except you have guidance. Destination in terms of destiny is only possible in the face of guidance. Then when you now know where you want to go, you sit into the car, you start the engine, and then you begin to use the steering. When you are using the steering, it means that you are making corrections. See, in arriving at that place, the roads are not straight. So you need to make corrections and make corrections and make corrections. That's where instruction comes. Guidance shows you your destination. Instruction is a daily diet that affords you the wisdom to make adjustments and corrections. It's like the steering wheel. How many of you can imagine how a car, a driving experience will look like when you lack the steering wheel? You are not likely to arrive at your destination. You end up in the jungle, or you will not be able to avoid an accident. So in order for you to avoid accidents on your journey towards the accomplishment of destiny, instructions serve the same purpose as your steering wheel, to make corrections and adjustments. So the first blessing God gives you is a blessing of guidance, which reveals the direction where he's taking you. Then the next blessing are daily blessings. God may not give you guidance every day, but God is likely to give you instructions every day, because you need to make corrections and adjustments if your destination is still in view. So the Bible says that God led him, God instructed him, and God kept him as the apple of his eye. There was intimacy. In order for the relationship to be sustained, God invested in intimacy. Now, you are not going to be very wise if you do not consider developing intimacy with God as something that is critical. Now, it must be understood that God is a spirit, and in order for you to cultivate a relationship with the spirit, it's a bit different from cultivating a relationship with a human being. All right, let me ask you a question as we navigate. How many of you heard the voice of God this morning? That is, maybe in your communion, God spoke to you this morning. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't lie to us. You will not profit anything lying. Are you with me? Because a time will come where you will need to depend on your ability to hear God. And in that day, that's the day we will know if you really hear him or not. So don't lie. If I notice that there are people that don't know how to secure the word of the Lord, I will teach you how to do it. So you don't need to lie. Because if you don't know what it means to invest in intimacy, you are at the risk of not maintaining the relationship that holds the key to your actualization. You know, when God called Abram out of the land of the Ur of the Chaldees, God told him that I will take you to a land that I will show you. That means God never gave him a map. There was no navigation instrument. God was going to be showing Abraham parts of the map as he advances. So every dream that Abraham had was critical because portions of the map were downloaded. Every encounter he had with God was critical because God was conveying other parts of the map. That was how Abraham had to depend on God in order for him to arrive at his destination. Because his success of arriving at his destination was dependent on his intimacy with God, Abraham cannot afford to quarrel with God. If not, God will abandon him in the desert. Many of you are not aware of the fact that it is your intimacy with God that is the fuel for your adventure with him. Now, if you don't know this, you will not invest in intimacy. And I need to tell us in very practical terms what it means to invest in intimacy with God. Your life is going to derive from it. It's going to derive from it. I was in the oil industry. I'd worked for 16 years. I'd grown in the ranks, and I'd arrived at the point where I need to write an examination and become a management staff in the field of my endeavor. I was good at the job, very good at the job. For those exams that we write, pass mark is 70 over 100. That's credit. If you get 70 over 100, you have credit. If you get 80 over 100, that is good. You get 90 over 100, that's very good. You get 100 over 100, that's excellent. So pass mark begins from 70. Now, I knew that if I sit for that exam, I'll pass it. Because all the other exams we've written, the least I scored was 74. And when I scored 74, the second person scored 48. So I was confident of the fact that if I sit for the exam, I'll pass. And I was looking forward to the exam. 2 weeks to the exam, then Jesus now comes to me and say, it's time for me to resign from my job. Meanwhile, are you still following what I'm talking about? Now, if I had not invested in my intimacy with God, there would have been no way for me to articulate the mind of God. As a young person, you are doing yourself so much danger if you don't invest in your intimacy with God. Are you there? First of all, God led Israel. Secondly, God instructed her. And thirdly, God held her as the apple of his eye. Intimate, affectionate, desirous. All of these things will work for you if you decide to build your intimacy with God. So, what are the major highlights in intimacy building with a spirit being? First thing you need to know about the infrastructure that God put in place to ensure that we are intimate with him is this. God, from the day you gave your life to Christ, is one with your human spirit. You are not following me? Okay, let me forget about that. This my lecture is a digression. I just wanted to give you a refresher course on intimacy. But I notice you are busy, so we'll forget about that for now. Maybe in the future we'll look into such matters. But we came here to talk about an ego. These scriptures that I'm majoring on now are merely appendages. Are you with me? Okay, let's try again. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 17 says, he that is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. So, if you are born again, what happened is that the Spirit of God has united with your human spirit. How many of you know Coke? You know Coke? You know Fanta? All right, so if you mix Coke and Fanta together, what do you have? Okay, it's exactly what you said, okay? We have the Spirit of God, we have your human spirit, and the Bible is saying that when we become joined to God, it's not two spirits, it becomes one spirit. Do you get that? Now, so if God moves, you will think it's your spirit that is moving. If your spirit moves, you will think it's God that is moving, giving you a possibility to become intimate with God much more than your wife, much more than your husband. Are you there with me? So in view of the fact that you are now one spirit with God, how can you know him? First of all, every activity that is designed to know God must be a spirit-based activity. Secondly, you cannot know God until God is willing to reveal himself. Hence, you will need to wait on him continually. The culture of waiting on God must be imbibed, must be a discipline that we must cultivate. Because you can go on a 3 days dry fasting and God was not willing to talk to you. When you finish your dry fasting, you go back home. God will only show up when he wants to show up. So you must not put a time tag in your engagement with God, because God does not respect your time tag. So okay, I'm going to labor for 3 days in fasting to hear God. You'll be amazed. After your 3 days, he will not show up, because he will show up because he wants to show up. Are you with me? So that you will not be frustrated. Well, we will shut it down. Shut it down.